It's Monday, November 6th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. It is a hell of a day to talk ball after a very, I'll call it interesting week 9. Joining me to do just that is the one and only Scott Pianowski. Scott, what's going on, buddy?
Not much, man. It was interesting. Well, week 9 highs and lows and stuff you can set your watch by and stuff that's driving us crazy. It's the NFL, man. And we're navigating these bye weeks. A lot of good teams don't play this week. A lot of good teams don't play next week. There's a 6-team bye week coming in the near future. So, it's the games are getting more important, Matt. You lose a fantasy game in September, you can blow it off. We're at the time of the year. And Buffalo's feeling this right now, where you start getting in that area where it's like, are we even going to make the playoffs at all?
Yeah, I was going to say that's a beautiful transition into our first game here to talk about, which is, of course, as it is every week, Sunday Night Football. Bengals 24, Bills 18. Like you said, Scott, the Bills, they're in a tough spot. If the season ended right now, today, which we know it does not, the Buffalo Bills would not be in the NFL postseason. The entire AFC North would be in the postseason, but the Bills would not be partaking in the experience if the season ended today. And of course, the season doesn't end today. We've still got some ways to go here, but the Bills have quite a tough schedule to end the year. They've got some definite tough games down the stretch to win, but I don't know. What was your takeaway watching the Bills tonight? Because, there's some herky-jerky moments, right? Josh Allen throws the interception. They get kind of a weird turnover on the Dalton Kincaid fumble as he's, flying through the air and the ball gets punched out. I don't know. What was your take watching the Bills offense? Because to me, I think their biggest problems are actually not on that side of the ball. It's really with their defense.
That's a fair point. Although when I watch Buffalo play offense, they could really use just a field stretcher, man. Just somebody like a Raheem Shaheed will look so good on this team, right? It just feels like so much of their offense is, okay, people are giving Allen a shell. Let's throw underneath it. Let's have one of those 11, 12 play drives. I don't feel like there's enough explosiveness to this offense right now. And that feels weird to say because Stephon Diggs is great. And Dalton Kincaid has really spread his wings since the Dawson Knox injury. And Josh Allen the last couple of weeks has run really proactively and gotten that part of his game going. But nobody else in the rushing game did anything. Gabe Davis was a total zero today. I guess if you needed Khalil Shakir, 4 for 57 was probably what you could have hoped for. I mean, I don't think he had much of a ceiling, but there's something missing with this Buffalo offense. I'm not sure what it is. I feel like I'm tasting the stew and it's nothing wrong with it. I'm not sending it back. I just feel like one of the ingredients is missing in the stew.
I think it's a really fair point, right? Like Gabe Davis is supposed to be their deep threat, but he catches 0 passes on just 2 targets. And it did seem like they were really trying to put that roof. Cincinnati was really trying to put that roof over the head of the Buffalo Bills. And, Lou Anarumo, the Bengals defensive coordinator, is great at this stuff. He's great at I think right now he's probably, if not the best, he's certainly one of the 2 or 3 best defensive coordinators at like crafting an individual game plan, especially designed to take away what one of these elite quarterbacks in that conference in the AFC wants to do really well right now. And I think you can frustrate Josh Allen when you put that roof over the head of the offense. And it sends this, I don't even know if it's just a Josh Allen problem, but it sends the entire unit sort of spiraling. Because I agree with you that like it did kind of make me laugh in the reaction to the Thursday night game, which I played a part in this too, talking about like the team really rediscovered this different identity, right? As they played a ton of 11 personnel, they got rid of some of the 12 personnel stuff, that 11 and a half personnel, which was really never going to work because Dawson Knox is out of the mix. And I think Khalil Shakir is a really nice addition to this passing game. He catches all 4 of his targets for 57 yards. I think he's a good player for them to get in the mix here. But some people are like, oh yeah, Gabe Davis is in a new role where he's getting some shorter layup targets. Like, well, Gabe Davis is never going to be able to do that and sustain that over the course of multiple games. That's just not who he is. He's never going to be a consistent player. He pops up with a 0 catch performance today. And I really think, Scott, it's crazy how this team in Buffalo like just gives up on the run game so fast, right? 6 carries for 20 yards for James Cook, 2 for 4 for Latavius Murray, and they just like turn Josh Allen into their running back. And I don't know, we're at a point with the Josh Allen Bills where they probably will make the playoffs, and I think they'll be just fine. But I do think there is some need for like an infusion of a new voice or a new direction in this Bills offense. I kind of feel like I felt that way all year long.
Trying to figure out also just how good the Bengals defense is. I mean, on one hand, it looks pretty good. You stack wins 4 in a row now. You beat Arizona, so what? But you beat Seattle, good team. You beat San Francisco, and San Francisco, good team. You beat Buffalo in a primetime game. So it sounds pretty good, right? But the Seahawks had 384 yards in that game, and they basically ran like a red zone drill for 3 hours. They just couldn't score touchdowns. And the Niners lost, but they put up 460 yards of offense. So it's not like Cincinnati was stopping the Niners. They just, again, they kept them from scoring points. They did hold Buffalo to just over 300 yards today. That's a feather in their cap. And I feel like now it's just, we're at a strange time for AFC favorites, right? I guess maybe Baltimore could be the favorite. Kansas City, Miami, neither team played anywhere near their peak today. Jacksonville's been good, not great all season. We're at a point where every team in the AFC North would make the playoffs, but nobody takes Pittsburgh seriously. Nobody takes the Browns, I don't think, seriously right now. It's kind of a statement on where the NFL is. Where you're never surprised when anybody loses. You're never surprised when any team really stubs their toe. I guess you could put Philadelphia at the top, but they've had some unimpressive wins. Hurts has thrown a lot more interceptions than we thought. There isn't a great team in the NFL right now. There are good teams. The Bengals are a good team. The Bills are a good team. And I won't be surprised if either team goes deep in the playoffs, and I won't be surprised if either team loses in the wild card round. I think that's where the NFL is right now, where it's a bunch of, there's just no ceiling teams that I see.
I think that this version of the Bengals that we watched tonight, and the version in the prior game against San Francisco 49ers, like that version of the Bengals can be the best team in the NFL. And we're just now getting to that point after their bye week with their quarterback being healthy. And it's just like, it's such a joy to watch this version of Joe Burrow and not the version that was, week 2 against the Ravens, or God forbid week 1 against the Cleveland Browns. Even that week 3 game on Monday night, I believe it was Monday night against the Rams, it was just like, that was no fun to watch that version of Joe Burrow. Like, he just wasn't the same guy. It was like basically as if a backup quarterback was playing offense for the Cincinnati Bengals. Like, but with Burrow healthy, and I think, and I'm with you that their defense isn't it's certainly not a unit that, like, oh, you see one of your players going against the Bengals in fantasy, you're benching that player, you're making decisions off the Bengals defense. But I do think in real life, like I said, they can have these one-off games where they pitch a really good, like Lou Anarumo pitches a heater. So I think with that in mind, and with the Bengals offense looking how it is right now, and Burrow specifically looking how he looks right now, T. Higgins getting back involved recently, Joe Mixon's even stacked together a couple of quality games. I think that version of the Bengals can be probably the best team in the NFL. And we'll just know the answer to that like a month and a half from now. We just don't, I'm with you, we don't really know it right now.
It was a little surprising to see the usage for the Bengals to spread out as it was, where they threw the ball a handful of times to guys were never going to play for fantasy. Tyler Boyd, Tanner Hudson, Drew Sample, Irv Smith had a touchdown in this game. Maybe it's just a fantasy comment, but I just feel more comfortable when it's like 13 targets for Chase off the bus. Higgins did get the 9 targets today, and even though Mixon wasn't efficient, he gets 19 touches and a touchdown. I mean, that's, if you can do that in the NFL, you're like running back 6. It doesn't even matter if you're averaging 2.5 yards per carry. But mostly, it's just good to have Joe Burrow back in our lives. And at least say this for the Bills. Allen every week does it. Stephon Diggs every week does it. Since Kincaid's role has expanded every week, he does it. There's like 3 guys you can stretch your watch by. The Kincaid prop was laughably low. I don't think it even got out of the 30s this week. So that was like free money if you wanted it. And it's just nice to see T. Higgins. Last week was the referendum on wide receiver 2s, where Waddle got home and Devonta Smith got home. And T. Higgins was the one guy left behind. Big win for him today, going 8 for $110 on 9 targets. Just to remind us that, yeah, I'm T. Higgins. I'm still pretty good at football.
Yeah, Chris Collinsworth, like kind of casually during the game, just said, oh, yeah, he'll probably be playing for a different team next year because of salary cap implications and stuff like that. I wonder if that does end up being the case. And I really am so curious what happens to T. Higgins on a different team, right? Like, I guess any of these guys, like, the Devonta Smiths, like the Jalen Waddles and all those guys, like if they really were, because I've asked so many questions this year about the 1B receiver and whether that's just like a BS thing that we talk about and whether it's like there really is just a 1 and a 2. I'm really curious just what happens with T. Higgins. But for now, for the rest of this year, yeah, I think he's just right back into what we maybe not like. I don't know if any of these guys are going to return second round pick value in fantasy football, but I do think that he projects really well rest of season.
When you've gone under the hood with Higgins and done the perception stuff on him, what's generally been your takeaway?
Yeah, I think he gets typecasted in the like doesn't get any separation group. I think he's a solidly above average separator, probably even like in the good separator range, like certainly not like a Mike Williams type where he's kind of average or right above average. He's better than that in the version of like extra. And that's the thing too, is like it's weird to talk about these Bengals receivers together because both of them are like prototypical X receivers and neither one of them has to really be the prototypical X in this offense because they both can play that position and they are so interchangeable in that way. And I think like in my mind, at least there's a big gap between how good Jamar Chase is and how good T. Higgins is. I don't know if that means that I think Higgins is a 2 and he's going to get kind of pushed into that number 1 mold. But I think if he is a number 1 receiver, he's on the low end of that number 1 receiver ranking, if that makes sense.
Is that Cincinnati gap between those two guys, is it bigger than the Hill Waddle gap or the Smith AJ
I think
Brown
it's
gap,
the biggest. I think it's the biggest gap. Yeah. And that really has nothing to do with how I mean, I think Chase is, to me, going into this year, there was a clear 7 of like the elite wide receivers in the NFL. Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, AJ Brown, Jamar Chase, and Cooper Kupp. So all 3 of those, the ones in those offenses are all in that elite tier. I think that I would probably right now still say Jamar is the 3rd best of that group. And I think Higgins is the 3rd best of the number 2s there in those respective offenses as well.
As much as I may be nitpicking about this game, I'll just finish with this. Given the quarterbacks we had to watch in week 9 and all the teams were playing with their second quarterback, their third quarterback, with quarterbacks who just joined their team, stuff like that, it's just nice that like Cincinnati can roll out Burrow, who's 100% now, and Buffalo can roll out Josh Allen, who even in a bad game, he runs for a touchdown, he throws for a touchdown, he gets decent passing yardage. He'll end up being around 20 points in fantasy. You'll be a little bit disappointed in Allen's game, but you'll be just fine. It's been a year where the defenses have been ahead of the offenses. It's been a year where unders have been cashing like crazy. At least these guys could roll out the players who are supposed to be their best players because a lot of teams in the NFL can't do that right now.
Oh my God, yes. Well said, Scott, because pull up your bootstraps, people. Put on your hazmat suits. We are about to talk about some pretty chaotic quarterback performances, but not yet. First, let's jump into the headliners coming out of week 9. All right, let's get into it, starting with Eagles 28, Cowboys 23. Thrilling game, pretty much lived up to expectations for me, Scott. The end of game sequence for Dallas was, pretty emblematic of some of the issues that continue to haunt this team. But from a fantasy angle, from a production angle, a lot of guys got home. What stood out to you from this game?
Yeah, best game of the day. At least among contending teams. The best game of the day was probably Houston, Tampa Bay, but I don't know either one of those teams is going to get to the playoffs. We'll get to that in time. CJ Stroud, thank you for everything you're doing to try to save football. But the Dallas-Philadelphia game felt like a playoff game. There were lead changes. There were a lot of great plays by a lot of great players. The tricky thing for fantasy, because Lamb was fantastic, and Devonta Smith and AJ Brown had touchdowns. We had a tush push for a touchdown. Jalen Hurts had a couple of touchdowns. I get asked so many Tony Pollard start-sit questions today, and I just said, hey, Dallas, they played a lot of blowout games. They played a lot of games where their fourth quarter starters their main guys weren't playing the whole game because they were way ahead, they were way behind. They just played the screwball schedule. It's been a really bad run out for Tony Pollard. I know his efficiency's down a little bit, but he's an unquestioned bell cow on a good offense. You have to stick with him. And I told people to start Tony Pollard over a lot of reasonable alternatives. And another quiet Tony Pollard game, 12 for 51 on the ground. He catches 3 short passes, close to scoring a touchdown, but those don't mean fantasy points. Matt, I need a state of the Tony Pollard address because Dak looked really good. CeeDee Lamb's terrific. Producer Colin pointed out Jake Ferguson's really growing up. Jalen Tolbert made some plays in this game. I still feel really good about the Dallas offense, even if they couldn't quite make just enough plays to pull out this game. Amazing how close they were to another touchdown at the goal line and all that stuff. Dallas's offense is fine. I just don't know what's wrong with Tony Pollard. What's your stake on that?
Look, I think he's going to be a candidate for the coping corner tomorrow in the panic meter. And the biggest reason, Scott, is, I mean, obviously we've talked a lot about, is he really a bell cow back, right? Like in theory, he's the bell cow here because he's the number one guy. This offense is very good. Rico Dowd touches the ball 2 times. He gets 2 carries in this game. There's not a guy that's going to come in here and snip at Tony Pollard's heels in terms of the rushing workload. But the biggest reason for me, and it's kind of because of all this stuff, the biggest reason for me that I think that Pollard is just like, it is what it is now at this point, is because the Cowboys are a good offense when they're not putting the ball in Tony Pollard's hands over and over again as a rushing unit. Their best stuff is when they have Dak Prescott drop back to pass, 44 times in this game. He throws 44 passes. He scrambled, or he runs 6 times as well. So like, and when they're distributing the ball, first and foremost is CeeDee Lamb, right, who gets 16 targets in this game. He has another dynamic performance. He's a great player. But as you mentioned, some of these ancillary players are stepping up. Michael Gallup only gets 3 targets. He drops one of them. He has big third down conversion in the other. But like Jake Ferguson's starting to stack performances together. Jalen Tolbert has a couple of moments. Like this is when the Cowboys offense is at its best, when Dak is really kind of in control of this thing, when it's mostly funneling through CeeDee Lamb. And unfortunately, I think that Tony Pollard and like getting him carries is just not the most efficient way for the Cowboys to play football. So he's probably, I think, somebody you're going to end up rolling out in fantasy every single week, but he's not even going to come close to returning some of the optimistic projections from the preseason.
But here's the other problem. If they just decide they're more efficient throwing the ball to CeeDee Lamb, I think that's undeniably true. But Tony Pollard, generally over 5 yards a carry. His career, I know yards per carry is a limited stat. There's a lot of noise in it. This is a guy who's basically, his career into the season was 5 yards a carry. He's at 3.9 yards a carry into today, and he would not get much of a bump today. His yards per touch last year was 5.9, previous season 6.2. This year, he's 4.5 yards per touch. Tony Pollard is part of this problem because he's been far less efficient this year. It's one thing, the past years it was like, okay, well, they're going to give Zeke the heavy workload and Pollard's a change of pace guy. And look how efficient Pollard is. And let's get Zeke out of here. Let's give Tony Pollard the bell cow role. Well, I realize the touches aren't what you expect, but with this efficiency, you can make the case that he doesn't deserve more touches.
Exactly. And the ways that if he's going to be the running back one, the bell cow back, like take those Zeke carries, his yards per carry was destined to come down. So it's kind of like he's screwed in
this
both
is a huge
ways
drop.
here.
Drop, it's one thing. Look, we always talk about this, right? You trade efficiency, you make up with the volume. That's a constant fantasy refrain. We say that every year about guys because it's harder. It's like a relief pitcher in baseball. You can come in with your hair on fire. You have an unbelievable ERA, and then if they ask you to start the game and you have to go 5 or 6 innings, it's a totally different thing. That's kind of what we're looking at with backup running backs or second running backs, and then they switch into a role where they have to touch the ball more. We'll give up some of the efficiency. I get it. But I don't think anybody thought Tony Pollard would average 3.9 yards a carry. I just didn't think that was in his reasonable range of outcomes.
Now, here's the deal, Scott. We're saying all this, and I believe everything I just said, that like the Tony Pollard identity of the offense is just not what it's going to be. It's going to be the pass game. It's going to be CeeDee Lamb. That being said, the next 3 games, Giants in Dallas, in Carolina to take on the Panthers, Washington in Dallas. Those 3 games, I could easily see 1, 2, maybe even 3 being really nice Tony Pollard games. And I still think there is going to be a little pocket of the season when Tony Pollard, he had his first touchdown since week 1 called back tonight, right? We might be having a slightly different conversation about Pollard if that play didn't get called back. But I think there's going to be a pocket, maybe 2 of these games, maybe 1 of them, maybe all 3, where it's like, see, told you Tony Pollard was a big positive regression candidate, but I don't think it's going to come over the course of the season, and certainly it hasn't to this point.
I think what's going to happen is he's going to go off against the Panthers, And people are going to say, oh, yeah, it's really exciting that Tony Pollard just went ballistic for my team, and now we're 4-7. Thank you, Tony Pollard. Did we hear anything? Dallas Goedert got hurt in the second half of this game. Did you see a report on that?
Yeah, he was ruled out pretty quickly. It looked kind of grisly. So, I will say this. We saw last year when Dallas Goedert went out, Devontae Smith really popped up. Then if you look back at his season from last year, a lot of his biggest games, not all of them, but a good amount of his biggest production games did coincide when Dallas Goedert missed time. He actually went on IR last year. If that happens again this year, I think we could certainly be looking at a lot of really strong performances from Devontae Smith to close the game here, to close the season here, who obviously scored a touchdown today, went over 51 yards. Really nice touchdown reception there for Devontae Smith. He's a very talented player. Jalen Hurts is clearly still gutting it out. He looked like he picked up a rather serious knee injury, but played the rest of the game. So I think there's always going to be a little something missing in Philly's passing offense as long as Hurts is banged up. But yeah, I think Dallas Goedert certainly, with how quickly he was ruled out, I would think he might be at risk of missing some time.
Yeah, sounds like that. I have a feeling this was the first of 3 games we're going to see between these teams. Obviously, one more is scheduled, but they're on a collision course. They play great games. I would love to see them play another time in the playoffs.
I agree with you. I love these two teams when they play against each other. This game was pretty high scoring, 28-23. Typically, it feels like the higher scoring shootout types have actually been in Dallas. So we might be in for like a real treat if and when everybody is healthy in that Dallas game. That would be great to see. But it does feel like two teams that, again, the Eagles they win this game. They haven't quite fired on all cylinders offensively. Like, they haven't gotten a huge DeAndre Swift game in quite some time. He takes his 18 carries for 43 yards. He's fine in fantasy. It is what it is. But they haven't quite fired on all cylinders at all times, where Dallas, I know they don't win this game, but it does feel like they are sort of growing into themselves throughout the course of the rest of the season.
This always feels like the legacy division to me of the 8 divisions. And the question is, and again, producer Colin can speak to this probably better than I can. It's always a question, who is Dallas's biggest rival, right? Because Dallas and the Giants has always been a huge rivalry, and Dallas and Washington has a history of great games. But right now, Giants are in a bad place. Washington's a middle-of-the-road team. For some reason, they seem to play Philadelphia really well, and they did look well. They did look pretty good today. They looked pretty good today against the Patriots, and so maybe Sam Howell's turning a corner, and that would be exciting. But the NFC East right now has 2 really good teams and 2 other teams, and so Dallas, Philadelphia should be. And I hope the other game is probably a standalone. Although today it felt like a standalone. There's only 3 games in the late window, but I was, the only thing that made me sad is late in this game. I was like, I'd love to see overtime in this game, and there was really no plausible way that would have happened. But a lot of
could have happened if Dak Prescott had just kept his foot in bounds.
right, for sure. But man, after all the ugliness we had, and we're going to get to some ugliness really soon on this podcast, I needed something to cleanse the palate, and I think for the most part, Philadelphia and Dallas did that. Well,
we started the week Chiefs 21, Dolphins 14. I'm curious your thoughts on this one, Scott, because I know it's a foreign game across there in Europe, the whole thing, but I do think there are some big picture takeaways to come out of this one. For me, I mean, look, it might be a stupid narrative. I'm sure people inside the Dolphins building isn't going to like to hear it. I'm sure like some people in like big brain football media are going to roll their eyes at it. But look, the reality is like the Dolphins have dropped 3 games against really good teams. The Chiefs game, obviously here, this one was pretty close. The Dolphins fought back into it, then couldn't deliver in the final drive. Obviously, they got beat pretty bad by the Eagles. They got beat really bad by the Buffalo Bills. So what do we make of this phenomenon where when Miami faces bad teams, we know they're going to trounce them. So far, they have not been able to kind of get this particular monkey off their back.
Yeah, that's certainly the big thing Miami has to do is beat a quality opponent. But for the most part, to me, this was the classic, okay, here, go play a football game in Germany. Football is a game of routine. It's a game where every day of the week has the same understanding what you're doing. Monday, you know what you're doing. Tuesday, you know what you're doing. Wednesday, you know what you're doing. And when you have a travel abroad week, everything's different. Travel's different. The sleeping accommodations are different. The food is different. The field you've never played on before, all this stuff. I throw this game out. We know Andy Reid is a master after the bye week, which the Chiefs obviously will take. Mike McDaniels, one of the best coaches in the NFL. He's got now 2 weeks to try to figure it out before Miami plays again. So I'm willing to give both of these off. I mean, who would have thought that neither Mahomes or Tua would get over 200 yards passing. That just sounds crazy, right? But the thing that's troubling to me is that Miami, I mean, Tua's fine. He didn't get there today, but he usually will. Tyreek Hill had a quiet game, but whatever. Raheem Mostert at the very end of the game busted off a couple of runs and snuck in a touchdown. He was looking at having an absolutely horrible fantasy game. And Achane is not that far away. You would think probably after the bye week he's getting back. So I don't know how much longer Mostert is viable. Waddle has been really quiet. The Patriots gifted him a touchdown last week, but he's been disappointing. Somebody you kind of feel forced to play, but you don't feel good about it. All Rashee Rice did today was catch a short touchdown pass, but nobody in the Kansas City passing game went over 35 yards receiving. That's not good enough. I'm just mostly just going to say, okay, Mulligan, coaching infrastructure we trust, offensive infrastructure we trust, a game in a foreign country. It's so unusual to ask them to play somewhere where they never play and have all this extra traffic and maybe even these extra media demands and stuff. I actually don't like it. I don't mind the NFL wants to be global and everything, but yeah, throw us the Jaguars and the Titans. I can live with that. I can live with that in London. That's fine with me. Don't put the Dolphins Chiefs game in Germany. That actually kind of bugs me a little bit.
Oh man, I don't know. I mean, I know if I'm a London fan, I'm like, damn, you have been throwing us Jags Titans for quite some time. Even the Jags Falcons game was a little like, all right, this is not that entertaining, even though the Jaguars are.
Was this game entertaining? I was not entertained by it. Were you?
I mean, I think that you are discounting a little bit like how good the Chiefs defense is. And I think
fair point.
That has been sort of the big takeaway for me this season is that like we do this every week where we obsess over the Chiefs offense and like the receiver room, and like the receiver room is what it is. People are excited about Rashee Rice in fantasy, and I get it. I'm excited about Rashee Rice in fantasy, but he's still a developmental receiver, and he's probably their best receiver, and he can really only do a couple of things right now, which is really problematic. But I think they feel great about their offense as long as number 15 is healthy, and it's really hard to blame him for that. And so far, like, this defense has worked. Chris Jones is great. George Karlaftis and especially Trent McDuffie have been huge hits. They've got guys like Leo Chenal that make big plays every now and again. Mike Edwards and Justin Reed, big free agent additions. Like, for all of the effort that they put into making their offense good and evolve into the next phase post Tyreek Hill, as much as that hasn't worked, everything they've done on defense has worked. And I did think in this game, that was my big takeaway. As much as Miami sometimes shot themselves in the foot, like a lot of those situations were induced by a very good Chiefs defense.
For this week, the Chiefs were 5th in offensive DVOA, 5th in defensive DVOA. It's been a long time since we could say those units were somewhere close to even. The Dolphins were 1st in offensive DVOA, 22nd in defensive DVOA. It's just hard to imagine. Okay, here's the Chiefs. Not the DVOA is DVOA is the be all end all. It's something. It's something to look at, to consider with other things, with your observations and other stats you care about. But in the old days, we said, the Chiefs against the 22nd ranked DVOA defense in the middle of the season when the stats actually have meaning. Okay, fine. What does Mahomes throw for 350? Where does Travis Kelce go, 8 for 150 and 2? They need to, as much as I like Rashee Rice, I still feel like this team is playing a receiver short. They have a bunch of guys you can't trust. Sky Moore, I think people are pretty much given up on. Justin Watson makes a play once a month. MVS makes a play once a month. I do like Pacheco. I still think they could maybe do a little bit more with him in the passing game. He only had one target today. Last year McKinnon was really good in the playoffs as a receiver. He did catch a touchdown pass today. I'm disappointed. The whole trade deadline was a dud. I really would have liked to have seen Kansas City add one player of value.
Yeah.
Even like Donta Foreman on this team, I really would have liked just anybody who could help them. And it just seems like they're playing a man short.
Yeah, I totally get that. I think they're still banking on one of these receivers like really taking a leap in the middle of the season. But at this point, I would be kind of like in I'll believe it when I see it territory with that specifically happening. Let's move on to what was supposed to be the fourth like big game this week. It was supposed to be Ravens Seahawks. One team did not live up to the billing here as the Ravens win 37-3. The Seahawks completely get blown out in this one. We just talked about the Chiefs defense. The Ravens defense is incredible. So kind of a predictable letdown spot for Seattle, although it was extremely disappointing to see it happen. And then, man, on the Ravens offensive side, Scott, like they score 37 points Lamar Jackson has kind of a quiet fantasy game, but it was because they ran the hell out of the ball.
For the season, one of my strong takeaways was that I didn't think there was a lot of pumpkin risk to Geno Smith. Even if he had some regression, I think he'd regress from having a great season to a very good season. I don't know what to expect from Geno week to week, half to half, series to series, play to play. I'm never surprised when the Seahawks have a couple of series in a row where it looks like everybody just met, where the offense doesn't know each other. And Kenneth Walker was eliminated by this game. Look, Baltimore's defense is very good. Baltimore home field advantage is still legitimate at a time in the league where it's not that important. Baltimore's record in outside the conference games is unbelievable since Jackson got there. So I guess that's part of the story. Seattle was coming west to east, all that stuff. But I don't know anybody who thought this was going to be a 34-point blowout. I'm officially worried about the Seahawks offense.
Mm-hmm.
And the Ravens, man, got a lot of Gus Edwards questions. And I think more often than not, I told people to play Gus Edwards. And I don't know how to spin it. 5 for 52 rushing with 2 touchdowns. That's great. But he only had the 5 carries. We know he's just about nothing in the receiving game. And Keaton Mitchell, man, 9 carries, 138 yards, a touchdown. It felt like every time I saw him running with the ball, he was ripping off an 8-yard gain, a 12-yard gain. He had a 60-yard run in this game. He's going to play more, man. Now, granted, it's not like pushing Justice Hill to the bench is going to be that big of a deal. And I don't think they want Gus Edwards to be a bell cow anyway. We talked about that trade deadline being a dud. I think a common refrain was like, well, okay, Gus Edwards survived the trade deadline. Well, I guess that's true. Keaton Mitchell's going to play. What Keaton Mitchell did today was too good to look away from. I'm not saying he necessarily goes to the top of this backfield, but you might have a 2-man, 3-man committee, and then you factor in the idea that Jackson's going to run it out just about every week too. He's too good of an athlete not to. And all of a sudden the Ravens, we went from, Gus Edwards, you can feel pretty good starting him, to I don't really know where Gus Edwards is right now because Mitchell, and he's going to be a very difficult fab guy this week too. Here's the bottom line. We talked about Baltimore a few weeks ago. Maybe it just took time for the new offense, for the Monken offense to settle. And they beat the snot out of Detroit a few weeks ago. Detroit's a good team. But even with that, I'm never surprised when anybody in this offense, it even includes Lamar, has a quiet game. Zay Flowers, I feel like he's uncoverable. He looked great in that 11-yard catch. That's the only catch he had, the only target he had. Now, I get it. The game gets out of hand. They didn't have to necessarily use him, but it was kind of a wide usage tree. Andrews got there. Beckham had a late touchdown, which he celebrated like they won the Super Bowl. Good for him. I don't think Rashad Bateman is ever going to be playable in my lifetime. The bottom line is I always feel like the Ravens should be a bountiful fantasy offense. And when I did the power rankings, I'm sure I gave them a good ranking. And right now I'm thinking, okay, yeah, you play Jackson. Yeah, you play Andrews. Flowers still stuck on 1 touchdown. I have no idea what the touches are going to be for Edwards week to week. I think Mitchell's going to be a mouth to feed now. This is a team where I know there's talent. This is a team where I know they can go to the Super Bowl. It's not a big leap to say that. And yet I wish there were more fantasy buttons to press here.
Yeah, it's weird. It's kind of like what's new is old again, or what's old is new again with the Baltimore Ravens, where like their defense is the driving force of this team. Like they're an incredible defense. I think they're right up there with Cleveland in terms of the best in the league, right? Because they can harass you, they can pressure you, but they also like suffocate on the back end. They just play incredible coverage back there. So that I think brings a little bit of the juice out of the offense overall, because like they don't need Lamar to, drop back and throw it all over the yard. Kind of similar to what we just talked about with Patrick Mahomes a little bit, but the running back rotation I think is really interesting. And just to stick on that for a little bit, like I think people will look at this box score and say like, oh, Keaton Mitchell, yeah, he got 9 carries and he ended up with 136 yards. But if you take away his long rush of 60 yards, like they'll do all that. Like, oh, Tyler Huntley got in this game. Maybe it was garbage time induced. These running backs had all of them had 4 carries at the end of the first half.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
4 for Justice Hill, 4 for Gus Edwards, and 4 for Keaton Mitchell. There was a lot of hype about Keaton Mitchell, the undrafted rookie, making the roster out of training camp in the preseason. He just had to go on IR to start the year, so he's only been playing for a couple of weeks. So I think they really like what they see from him. I also don't mind the take, Scott, that anytime anybody talks about the Ravens backfield, if your first reaction out there while you're listening is like, damn, what a season J.K. Dobbins was going to have in this offense. I don't mind if that's your first take here, because I think that is certainly most likely true. But, Justice Hill gets 13 carries. He had 6 in the fourth quarter to kind of salt this thing away. I do think we're probably still going to see a 3-man backfield here. I think it will probably go Edwards is the 1A, maybe Mitchell is the 1B, and then it's a sprinkling of Justice Hill, but Mitchell has to stack these performances together for that to be true.
The best news I can give you about Seattle is they are at home next week against Washington, and that should be a get-well spot for the Seahawks.
Yeah, I was going to close this with the same point. So let's move on here. Vikings 31, Falcons 28. I mean, hell of a performance for Josh Dobbs, who literally didn't know his teammate's name. Like he said to reporters afterwards, like, oh, that's next week's thing, is to like learn his teammate's name. He was not supposed to be in this game, but rookie Jaren Hall gets hurt. He ends up filling in, and Josh Dobbs leads the Minnesota Vikings to a win, 2 touchdowns, 20-30 for Josh Dobbs, 66 yards on 7 carries and a touchdown for Josh Dobbs as well. Just incredible stuff from Dobbs, and he hands Arthur Smith a loss that literally my entire timeline was celebrating. Like Twitter just won the Super Bowl because Arthur Smith lost here to the Minnesota Vikings.
It is crazy, the Arthur Smith schadenfreude that's out there. People just want the Falcons. If you're not a big Falcons fan, everybody else seems to be rallied and unified against Arthur Smith.
It is pretty hilarious.
I get it, but it's hilarious too. I imagined Arthur Smith coming home and just pretend that his wife didn't watch the game, say she was doing family stuff. Hey, honey, how'd the game go? Well, I have good news and bad news. What's the bad news? Well, we lost. What's the good news? Well, our backup tight end and our backup running back scored touchdowns. So my plan is coming together, right? We didn't have to get Brian Robinson Bijan Robinson in the end zone. You know, Kyle Pitts, one of my DFS teams. I'm like, oh, a lot in sleeper. He's cheap. Well, wait a minute, I can squeeze in Kyle Pitts. Why don't I do that? No, let's not do that. Well, I did. You know, not that Kyle Pitts having a 4 for 56 game is a tragedy or anything, but of course it's Jonnu Smith who
probably one of his best games.
Right. Of course. I guess Heineke played. It was the classic Taylor Heineke game, right? You see him on the right possession, like, oh, okay, he's better than Desmond Ridder. You see him on the wrong position, it's like, oh, wrong possession. It's like, oh, good luck with Taylor Heineke. This kid, he's the donut in the back of the car. He's not meant to go 500 miles. You're trying to go 50 miles or 100 miles and make a pit stop. Unfortunately, the pit stop is Desmond Ridder, and that's no better. Dobbs is amazing. Look, 5.3 yards per attempt. That's substandard, but the guy just joined the team. He was practicing cadences on the sideline to get ready. He's not supposed to play in this game. He's helicoptered into Arizona before the season. He acquits himself well. I know they only won 1 game, but they played hard. They were competitive. He's athletic. Every one of their snaps today, at least the passing snaps, it felt schoolyard. And I mean that as a compliment, where Dobbs played, he competed, and he one of the 4th down scrambles he had on the ultimate go-ahead drive was a play that looks dead in the water. And only because of his competitiveness, his athleticism, and his will did the play survive, and he made a 1st down. He's just such an easy guy to like. And everybody in this Minnesota passing game, even if you didn't have Cousins, whatever, you needed to have somebody here who could keep Hawkinson going, who could keep Addison going, who could keep Justin Jefferson, who's supposed to come back pretty soon, going. And, you know, Hawkinson did the Hawkinson, 7 for 69, no touchdown. That's the Hawkinson. Addison got you 5 for 52. That didn't kill you. Somehow Alexander Madison caught a touchdown pass. I'm sure the NFL will review that to make sure it actually happened, but I saw it. It was number 2. I'm pretty sure that was Alexander Madison. You know, the Vikings, they're 5-4. They're not going away. Kevin O'Connell's doing a pretty good job with this team. The defense was supposed to be terrible, and it hasn't been. I know they kind of got lit up a little bit today, but here's the bottom line. In a world where we can't unify on anything, we can't get 3 people to agree on the same toppings of pizza, I think we can all agree that Joshua Dobbs is fun, and Joshua Dobbs is going to give some buoyancy to this offense. He's not Kirk Cousins, right? He's not even a league average quarterback, but he'll get the ball. He was getting the ball to Marquise Brown. He was getting the ball to Zach Ertz. He was getting the ball to McBride. Cardinals were competitive just about every week on his watch. He joined this team, 4 or 5 days ago. He's been with 5 teams in the last calendar year. He's been with 7 different NFL franchises. I'm all for Josh Dobbs, man. And as somebody who needs Hawkinson, who needs maybe Madison to be quasi-relevant, I think that's all in play.
Remember when he had, I don't know if you saw it, like he put like a social media video out of like, man, the Cardinals don't even have my jersey like in the team shop. What the hell? Like I'm the starting quarterback. Obviously, then he gets traded midseason. I don't know if the team that employs Josh Dobbs will ever have his jersey available in the team shop, because he just should be kind of like the NFL's all-time quarterback, right? Like, oh shoot, you need somebody this week. Like, I mean, like you said, 5 teams in the last calendar year. That is absurd stuff.
He should be wearing the Rob Lowe NFL hat, right?
Yes, yes.
He should. It's kind of like when somebody walks into that restaurant and they don't have a jacket and they have like a house jacket. So hey, just put this on. Yeah. Here's your house jacket. Here's your house quarterback. It's Joshua Dobbs. He will fly wherever he needs to go. He's like some crime fighter or some person, some drifter who just shows into town, solves all the problems, makes a bunch of friends, and leaves.
It's beautiful stuff. And by the way, like,
I'm all for it, man. This is one of the greatest stories. This is one of the 5 best stories in the NFL right now, if you ask me.
100%. And like the Vikings are a great story too. Like you said, they're 5-4. If the season ended right now, they'd be the 7th seed in the NFC playoff. Like people want to have them blow this team up, right? Like they wanted to sell at the deadline. They sold off an offensive lineman, but they bought Josh Dobbs. So like they're kind of still in limbo there, you know, or they're never going to be bad enough to get a top level quarterback prospect. And I guess you could say that's maybe a bad thing, but dude, Kevin O'Connell is such a good coach. Like he deserves credit for this as well. Obviously we're giving a ton of flowers, and deservedly so, to Josh Dobbs, but the way Kevin O'Connell has been, I think, just a huge home run as a head coaching hire, a huge home run as an offensive play caller and play designer, is critical for this team. They haven't made brilliant personnel decisions in every regard, but by the way, Scott, one of my big takeaways from this game too was before kickoff, these guys are wearing like Kirk Cousins t-shirts. There's no way Kirk Cousins plays for. You bring this back up right now in March if I look like a dumbass, but I think there is like a 0% chance. Colin's already saying got it. There's a 0% chance Kirk Cousins plays for another team other than the Minnesota Vikings next football season. I mean, this team, they love him. Kevin O'Connell's bought in on him. I think they might bring somebody else in to, keep the ship afloat if Kirk has to miss time, which he might to start the season. Then maybe they even draft a rookie. But man, I really think like Kirk is kind of locked in as their guy for the foreseeable midterm future.
Interesting take. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but it seems to make sense. And also, if you're a Jefferson manager, you want them to win games. They've won these 4 games in a row now without Jefferson. If they had stumbled, they were 1-4 into the Chicago game. Now, granted, all Minnesota does is play 1-score games. I guess they beat the Packers pretty easily last week, but every other game they had this year is a 1-score game, and all they did last year was win a 1-score game. So it feels like every game is going to be close. Next week is New Orleans, which would feel like another 1-score game too. I'm in whatever Josh Dobbs is selling, man. I'm in. And again, 5.3 YPA. He's got a lot to work on. Like, first names of teammates would be nice. Probably doesn't know all the audibles yet, stuff like that. I mean, football, it's so complicated to play quarterback and all the different terminology you need to know. You need to know everybody's job on the offense. It's not like just you get spoon-fed a couple of things. You need to know everything. And the fact they could pull this game away against the team that is the most fantasy bane of existence there is with Arthur Smith, man, it felt very satisfying to me.
Yeah, and my kind of final take on Arthur Smith is just like I've always been a big fan of his offenses dating back to the Tennessee days. I think they're really well designed. I think he is a good offensive coach. He just not cut out for this head coaching stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, period. I think that's kind of the end. I mean, did you see the stuff where like Kurt Warner had posted some like criticisms of the offense on social media, and Arthur Smith like completely acted like a clown when they asked him about it? I mean, it's just ridiculous, man. Like, you got to have some thicker skin than that. So, and then this whole team, like, look, I get it. You want to go with the hot hand, all that stuff with Tyler Algier. And I'm not saying Tyler Algier is a terrible player or anything like that, but it's just like you've allocated resources for these star players, and like, they should be your star players. And this offense is not good, and this team is not good. So we have a right to criticize that at this point.
And bristling at criticism from Kurt Warner, who 1 has Hall of Fame bona fides, and 2 is a very measured and reasonable guy, right? Kirk Cousins is not some hatchet man. He's not some hot take. I'm gonna eviscerate everybody. I'm gonna try to make social media quotes and everything. He's not like that at all. He's like, he's
not Stephen A. Smith. I mean,
exactly.
Look,
he's not Pat
all
McAfee,
respect to
right?
Stephen A.
He's not trying to light the world on fire. He's just trying to come up with answers, and he's a really good analyst too. He does his radio work is outstanding. I'm a big Kurt Warner fan, but also I'm a huge. I didn't mention this about the Eagles Cowboys game. Greg Olsen is so good, man.
Oh, he's so great.
I hope he keeps that number one chair. I don't know eventually what they're going to do with Brady, but Greg Olsen is terrific. I hope he stays there. But hey, let's get to the main event. We have gone this long,
yes,
and only in passing talked about the best quarterback in the NFL right now. Let's get to him.
Texans 39, Bucks 37. CJ Stroud, baby, 470 passing yards, 5 touchdowns, 71.4% completion rate. This game was just what a showcase by CJ Stroud, man, who I know this is like stupid to say, oh, wow, he was the number 2 overall pick. It's not as if people were, sleeping on him or anything like that. It's not like he's some underrated guy, but man, you think back to some of the criticism of him in the draft process, and it looked stupid then, frankly, and it looks really stupid now because this guy is just like, he's a dude. Like, he is the franchise quarterback, the exact thing that every team wants to discover in the draft, and the Texans have found one.
Mediocre offensive line. The running game went nowhere today. A lot of people needed Devin Singletary, and I said, hey, look, he's got guaranteed touches. He got 15 of them. They went absolutely nowhere. But Stroud, the game never seems too quick for him. He goes through his progressions. He seems to have a really great understanding of how to buy time, but still maintain his focus downfield. He'll run if he has to, but he's really trying to set up a play when he's scrambling. And for fantasy purposes, he makes 4 guys relevant in this game. He set a bunch of records. The most rookie passing yards. He tied the record with Matthew Stafford of most passing touchdowns by a rookie. And it all came in the context of a game that had 8 lead changes. Eventually, he has to come back and score a touchdown in 40 seconds or something like that. And he made tight window throws. He read zone and made correct throws. He made man-to-man throws. He made 4th down throws. Houston even lost their kicker in this game. It didn't matter. CJ Stroud, and let's give it to Ogunbowale, who had to make a 29-yard field goal, which was a great moment in this game as well. But I love games that have lead changes are exciting. You don't know who's going to win. And give credit to Baker Mayfield, who led the Bucs down the field through 1 of 2 touchdown passes to Cade Otton at the end of that game. Rashad White, I guess it's just going to be the volume all-star. Chasing volume can be a little bit of a dangerous thing, but he gets so much of it and so much receiving volume that he's a very high floor play with a tangible upside. But I know I've said this over and over again. People are probably sick of hearing it. The Panthers have to cry themselves to sleep. Maybe Bryce Young will turn into something. He played very poorly today through a couple of passes you just can't throw. And I realized, yes, the Panthers did beat the Colts last week. So that's something it's really the only thing they have going for themselves this year is that one game. But
yeah, they didn't get embarrassed by the guy.
It's impossible for anybody to look at this and not think, yeah, Stroud was the guy.
Our colleague Charles McDonald put it really well on Twitter today, where he said, I still think there's an avenue for Bryce to become a quality starter, but I don't think it's wrong to declare they took the wrong quarterback. That's a fair observation at this point. Like,
well said.
What else can you say? Like, it just, there's been nothing even close to this level from Bryce Young shown. CJ Stroud today, according to Next Gen Stats, on passes of 20 plus air yards, 6 of 8 for 199 yards and 3 touchdowns. Like, these are not little Mickey Mouse gimme throws by CJ Stroud. They're, like, I talk about big boy throws in the NFL. Like, these are the biggest of big boy throws that you could possibly be making here. And look, these players are good. Okay. Like, Nico Collins is good. Tank Dell is good. Right? Like, that was, I mean, that is the thing, right? Like, these guys are good players. They're not becoming magically good players because CJ Stroud is really good, but there's no question that he is elevating them. Like, you could put Bryce Young on this Texans team, and I think it would look better than Bryce Young on that Carolina Panthers team, but it's not going to look like this. Like, it's just not. Like, if you're watching those two quarterbacks and you disagree with that, like, I think you're being disingenuous. And really, that's no shade on Bryce Young, who, like I said, can become a quality starter in the league, but it's like, CJ Stroud is a quality starter in the league right now, and I don't think that was this hard to see coming. And all of these guys, right, like Noah Brown, you're probably never going to play in fantasy, right? 6 targets, he takes a 75-yard catch and run to the house. But like Dalton Schultz, you feel great about playing at this point. Tank Dell, you feel great about playing at this point. Nico Collins, you feel great about playing at this point. Like, all of these guys are legit playmakers as long as CJ Stroud is playing like this.
Hey, Frank Schwab and I had to play Noah Brown in a 14-teamer. I forget who he asked me, Brown or somebody else. It was like a backup running back. And We both went with Brown, not expecting 6 for 153 and a touchdown. A really nice play on that touchdown. But even Stroud, it's good enough that he's playing as well as he is. But when he steers all the production to 4 guys you might want for fantasy, Collins was a no doubt starter. Schultz and Dell were, a lot of people were probably on the fence with those guys. Hopefully you push play on them. As I mentioned, Frank and I in a deeper league needed to get desperate with Noah Brown. We would have been very happy with like 3 or 4 catches. We certainly didn't expect a blow up game, but we got it. And again, on Tampa Bay, Baker wasn't bad. 119 rating today. He didn't turn the ball over. He brought them, it looked like 99 times out of 100 what he did at the end of that game would have resulted in a win, or 95 times out of 100. Evans was good. Otton was really good. Rashad White is unstoppable. Godwin, just a fluke game you write off. You'd like to see a few more targets than what he got, and Evans actually wasn't targeted that much either. But we know what Tampa Bay is. It's an offense that's good, not great, and it's going to be centered around their 3 or 4 guys. So right now in the NFL, that probably makes you at least a league average offense, maybe even a little bit better than league average.
All right, let's move through the rest of the games here, starting with Raiders 30, Giants 6. I mean, the Giants, man, just canceled the season. You know, Daniel Jones probably has a torn ACL at this point. At least that's the fear, according to early reports. It's already been a disaster season for him anyways. You know, we'll see when Tyrod Taylor can get back, if he can get back. That Tommy DeVito is going to be playing games for the. I don't even know what to say about the Giants. Like, it just that is what it is. On the Raiders side of things, man, it just. Belief and like good vibes really matter. And that's kind of my big takeaway from the Raiders here in Antonio Pierce's first game as the interim head coach.
I'm all for this Pierce thing, right? All the straight out of Compton stuff. You have a team. It's pretty clear that Josh McDaniels was not well liked in the Raiders locker room. And did
you see the Jay Glazer report about Antonio Pierce and Josh McDaniels?
I did not.
Okay, so this was from Jay Glazer this morning. Before firing Josh McDaniels, the Raiders had like a team meeting where apparently the players directed their frustrations at McDaniels and just absolutely unloaded on him. McDaniels actually had Antonio Pierce speak on his behalf, and Pierce brought up the Giants team from 2007 that beat the New England Patriots in the Super Bowl, kind of showing like, hey, that team believed they could beat anyone. You know, Pierce said that the Raiders really needed to kind of embody that spirit and that mindset. The players apparently loved it, but Josh McDaniels didn't. And allegedly, Josh McDaniels pulled Pierce aside when everyone had left and said, don't ever talk about the Patriots like that. And that was pretty much when... and that's pretty much when everybody kind of decided, like, all right, this building is divided between McDaniels and the cronies and the whole former Patriots thing and like the people who really want to build something in Las Vegas. And that was when the decision was made by Mark Davis to move on.
I'm not having a great record this year against the spread, but as soon as they made this change and I saw what Pierce was selling and I thought how much the Raiders dislike Josh McDaniels, I'm like, okay, they're going to empty the emotional reservoir against a Giants team that is very limited right now. Of course, I didn't know that Daniel Jones would get hurt right away. And I feel sorry for they just put Taylor on IR, so he's out for several weeks. DeVito just should, like most third-string quarterbacks, he shouldn't be playing. They're going to give Barkley a lot of volume. That's about it. You can't go near any of their receivers. Waller's on IR as well. One thing I did get wrong is now granted the game script allowed for Aiden O'Connell to be kind of hidden in this offensive game plan. And when he was throwing the ball, you saw some of that JV connection. He had the long pass to Tucker. He threw to some of the other guys who aren't necessarily first stringers. I thought this would be let's take care of Devontae Adams game. It wasn't. Yeah. He had 7 targets, 4 catches. They didn't really go for anything. But this game got out of hand so quickly, and the Raiders realized they could just win by just putting the ball in Josh Jacobs' belly, running the clock. You let Max Crosby and the Raiders defense go kind of ham on 8 sacks I think the Raiders defense had.
God.
This just seemed like the more I thought about this game, I thought, okay, this is going to be the Raiders Super Bowl, right? Because what happens when you fire a coach, especially a coach who's not well liked, there can be a couple of emotional reactions that are really good. One can be, okay, ding dong, the witch is dead. We didn't like this guy at all. But also your last excuse, you can blame everything on that guy, but when he's gone, now it's on you. If you stink without him, you can't blame the coach anymore. So I think it's very natural for a team to hit the high end of their emotional and execution range after a week like this. And it's just cool to, the Raiders are actually a team for a team that doesn't have any upside. I know they have 4 wins. I mean, maybe O'Connell will play quarterback the rest of the year. I like watching Crosby play. I like watching Adams play. Jacoby Myers had a nifty end around for a touchdown today. They have guys I like. Crosby, man, they get their ass kicked at Detroit, right? But Crosby leaves it out in the field every play. I would love to have a team of Max Crosby's. I'd love to have one Max Crosby on my team. So it was satisfying to see the Raiders do what they do. The Giants, man, they have one guy you can play for fantasy. That's it.
As much as I agreed with you, I thought it was going to be like, let's get Devontae Adams right. Like, let's get him happy. I think they actually went into this game with that mindset about Josh Jacobs, and Pierce actually said a little bit of that going into this game. And like, as much as Adams has been the victim of circumstance here and it's not enjoyed his time with the Raiders and the Josh McDaniels experience, I think you could argue that Josh Jacobs is just as much of like a foundation player for this team from like a national perspective.
Fair.
And has probably been kicked in the ass by Josh McDaniels like literally on purpose, right? With the whole franchise tag, the 5th year option, the playing him in the preseason Hall of Fame game, all that nonsense. So maybe this was like, let's get Jacobs right and Adams' time will be in the future. All right, next game up here, Saints 24, Bears 17. Tyson Bagent had a couple of moments in this game, but ultimately throws 3 interceptions again against a really good pass defense, and the Taysom Hill offense, baby. He touches the ball 15 times in this one. I don't particularly enjoy. Actually, he touches it 16 times if you count his pass attempt here. I don't particularly enjoy watching either of these teams play this year, Scott, on offense. So I don't know. What do you got?
Well, at least we got Chris Olave back in the end zone. Taysom Hill's going to be a top 10 tight end for the 4th straight week, and
yep.
The thing with him is, and I realize his volume kind of escalated as this game went along, but even when the games when he's only going to have a handful of opportunities, they're so often going to be near the goal line. And the people who are going to be going crazy are the people in deeper leagues who need Derek Carr, because you never know when he's coming off the field. And the people, I don't feel sorry for any Alvin Kamara managers because he gets so much volume. He only had 13 opportunities today. But when they get to the goal, they got to the goal line today, and I heard the announcer say, okay, here comes Taysom Hill. It's the Taysom Hill show, not the Chris Olave show, not the Alvin Kamara show. It's not Foster Moreau show. Johnson played today, had a touchdown, whatever. It's this offense revolves around Taysom Hill, who's 32, 33 years old, a journeyman. I guess he's 33 now. It's just crazy. A team that has this many, Michael Thomas, you forget is on the team. What do you have? 1 target today, 1 incomplete. I think he's easily dropped. I never thought the player, Kamara's in a separate group of his own, but I never thought of everybody else. The one guy you could start with confidence would be Taysom Hill. I never thought we'd be at that place, but here we are.
Hard to blame him because nobody can seem to stop that play where
it works.
Jalen Saunders in the backfield.
And here's the thing too: when you do this gadgety stuff, where you put a quote unquote non-quarterback at quarterback, although Hill has quarterback skills, he's always a threat to run to throw the ball. That's why I always used to hate it when they put a running back for the direct snap. It's like he's going to run the ball. He's not going to throw it. Well, Taysom Hill can throw it. You have the whole playbook. Today. Yeah, he threw a touchdown pass today. You have the whole. And it's interesting, too. His 2 touchdowns today were a touchdown catch and a touchdown throw. And yet, when Taysom Hill does score a touchdown, you think it's most likely going to be on that power run. So I think he might be a top 6 or 7 tight end the rest of the way. He's gone from a novelty, am I really picking up Taysom Hill, to a speculation, am I really starting Taysom Hill, to like, okay, he's graduated from the start-sit questions. You're just playing Taysom Hill now.
Let's move on to the next game here. Commanders 20, Patriots 17. It is very funny from the Patriots side of things that like, oh man, the Commanders defense is so bad. You can get guys sealing in the passing game against the Commanders pass defense. And beautiful. The ceiling for Demario Douglas is probably 5 for 55. And the ceiling for Juju Smith-Schuster is probably 6 for 51, which is exactly what you got today. So that's your Patriots offensive update. And the Commanders, man, hey, we're at least back in business where the targets are going to Terry McLaurin and they're going to Jahan Dotson, and we can be thankful for that.
Yeah, Sam Howell has played back-to-back weeks against the Eagles, ferocious pass rush, and against the Patriots, well, Bill Belichick and some talent on defense. That's not the problem. That's not the reason why they stink. It's because their offense stinks. And Sam Howell was he sacked once last week? Only 3 times against the Patriots with 45 pass attempts. That boy's growing up. Now, I will say the Dotson touchdown was really strange because on the play, McLaurin's running in the same area, and you just somebody ran the wrong route, or something isn't right with that play. You shouldn't have two receivers that close to each other. It doesn't make any sense. But Dotson's gotten home 2 weeks in a row. A lot of people asked me about Dotson today, and I just felt like, well, he's had one good game in 2 months. I loved him all summer, but I think I would need to see it again. Well, I saw it again. McLaurin was quiet for most of this game, but he ends up getting active late, 5 for 73 on 7 targets. That's totally playable. Brian Robinson, I should say, had the type of game you can have. He's so game script dependent. He needs them to be in the game. We know he's not an active receiver. He only had 1 catch today, but I was ready to write off Sam Howell as nothing more than maybe like a poor man's Baker Mayfield. He competes. He's athletic, but he's not an elite athlete. He's just good enough to kind of run himself into trouble or hold the ball long enough to get into trouble. And I realized the Eagles defense maybe hasn't been stopping people this year, but he did it against them. Had a big game against Belichick. That means something to me, even if it's just going to push McLaurin back into no doubt start territory, into the top 15 every week. And now Dotson, I think you can play with a level of confidence. The Patriots offense, man. Like Stevenson had that 1 long touchdown run. That's great. Mac Jones was asked to play against a Washington defense, hasn't stopped anything, and basically gave away their pass rush at the trade deadline like it was Black Friday. They said, okay, who wants somebody? Black Tuesday, take them. You want Sweat? You want Young? You can have them. And Mac Jones, 5.0 yards per attempt. I know he didn't have his best receivers out there, but this team is, I'm so glad they lost. As a Patriots fan, I want them to lose as many games as possible, certainly the close games. This team has no playoff upside. This team has no championship upside. They need a new quarterback. It's not Mac Jones. So satisfied to see them lose.
Next game up here, Colts 27, Panthers 13. Bryce Young throws a couple of pick sixes. Panthers offense is what it is. Hayden Hurst is their leading receiver with 254. The backfield is okay. Chuba Hubbard's a starter. Who cares?
So
I mean, the Panthers are big whoop. The Panthers are what they are. The Colts, I mean, it's a weird game for them. When your defense scores 2 pick sixes, it's going to be really tough for players to get home. But I mean, it was just clear who was the better team on the field today.
Yeah, a frustrating game because Indy's been such a carnival. The Panthers have been so awful against the run. So we're thinking, okay, high scoring game. Our colleague Kate Majuk had the take that you could play Taylor and Moss together in this game. And I thought that was a great take.
Yeah.
But that's predicated on Carolina fighting back a little bit and Bryce Young not throwing away 2 possessions on pick sixes. Once that happens, the pick six is the worst thing if you needed Taylor and Moss, because then the Panthers go back on offense and you just choose up a bunch of time. I think Kate's take was actually a really good one, but it didn't come to fruition. Although Taylor was fine. He had the 5 catches. He had the touchdown through the air. So he had a fine game. I thought he had a chance to have a blow-up game, which he did not have. I thought the Zach Moss play was perfectly reasonable. He didn't get there. I'm encouraged that on a day where the Colts didn't throw the ball that well or that much, Michael Pittman still had 8 catches. So he's, that's not going to kill you as long as your league has some PPR component. That's fine. It was hard to watch. Bryce Young played today like he'd never been coached. He just made some throws. He was throwing, it's 4th down at the end of the game. Who cares? Balls all day. No matter what down it was, no matter what the game situation it was.
He was
those
pressing,
pick sixes were,
and that's bad. Those pick
sixes were gifts. We're just like, okay, I got to get rid of the ball. I'll just throw it here, and it's going back the other way. And plays where the moment it was picked, you're like, okay, that's a touchdown. You can't, he can't be doing that. And I realized he played pretty well against the
Texans
last week, right? But terrible today against the Colts defense that hasn't stopped a nosebleed all year. Hubbard gets volume, does nothing with it. Adam Thielen had a quiet game, 5 short catches on 6 targets. So I don't know if the air is going to go out of the balloon at some point for Thielen, but I don't know how many ways you can say it. And I agree with what Charles McDonald said. I mean, it's still possible for Bryce Young to figure it out, become a decent pro. The idea that he'll ever going to be better than CJ Stroud just feels like a fairy tale right now.
Packers 20, Rams 3 for the next game up here. The Rams are hopeless without Matthew Stafford, and I don't know what else to say. Kind of a predictable take. They haven't even really been as the results have not been as good as some of the aesthetically pleasing tape that Stafford in the passing game has put out to start the year. And then obviously you remove Stafford from it. No running back averages more than 3 yards per carry. No receiver gets more than 7 targets or goes over 50 yards. Brett Rippon completes sub 50% of his passes. Like, the Packers, Scott, are an utterly beatable opponent right now. And the Rams just were completely outclassed in this one. That's a bad sign.
Can you remember a week in the meat of a season where we had to rely on more backup and unknown and low ceiling quarterbacks? The league as it is, really it's been rough. A defensive year. The offenses are getting beat this year, but now you take 6, 7, 8 starters, and then even guys who weren't starters got hurt today, and Jones got hurt, and the Vikings quarterback got hurt. It just makes for some ugly football, and it's totally pulled the plug on the Rams offense. It's funny. Some people would say, "Oh, Jordan Love, 8.8 yards per attempt, no interceptions, good game for Love." He did take 4 sacks, and on a couple of them, he had throws that were defined, that were there, that he's going to be like, pull the trigger right there. I don't care if it's a 7-yard completion. That's a positive play. And I think he still leaves stuff on the field. I still don't trust Jordan Love. The only encouraging thing I really saw from the Packers today, I guess if you're going deep, Musgrave had the touchdown. That's fine. I mean, he's rookie tight end. Maybe he can pick up his game in the second half of the year. They said they were going to lean into Aaron Jones. They did. He had 24 touches. I realized he just eked over 100 total yards. He had a touchdown, but he should be there clear 2/3 back, and A.J. Dillon should just be a complimentary piece. Jones hasn't been healthy enough for that to be the case, but today it was. Again, the efficiency wasn't great. Jones's long run was 9 yards, but this offense, I still don't trust Aaron Jones. I still don't trust Jordan Love. I don't trust any of the wide receivers. So I'd like to have something I can hang my hat on in this offense. I guess it's finally going to be Aaron Jones.
Producer Colin makes a great point in the chat that Packers and Rams is sort of a microcosm of the quarterback crisis that we've been talking about on the podcast, where it's young guys not taking the step, Jordan Love, and it's backup quarterbacks playing for injured and or just old quarterbacks. And frankly, Scott, I think that is the case with the final game that we have to talk about here. Browns 27, Cardinals 0, where Clayton Tune is playing the part of a backup quarterback in place for an injured guy, and Deshaun Watson is the guy who is not really young like a Jordan Love, but he's definitely not taken any steps so far this year. And let me tell you what, buddy, I think generally tanking or not putting out your best product does not happen in the NFL, but we joke a lot in fantasy. Well, they're not going to play. Why would they play Kyler Murray in his first game back against the Browns defense? They're not going to do that to him. I kind of think that's what the Cardinals did here, where Kyler Murray may have been healthy enough to play in any normal circumstance. Let's have you just come back in week 10 and we're just going to throw Clayton Tune to the Wolves here because that guy wasn't ready to play. It wasn't a serious offense with him. I mean, it's a pathetic box score to look at. It was you didn't spend a lot of time checking in on the Cardinals today, and pretty predictable result for them. And on the other side, same thing. The Browns are, they beat up on this team, but I don't know how seriously to take that.
Do you know how many yards the Cardinals had today?
I mean, 70? I don't know.
58. 58 yards of offense. That's almost impossible. I mean, you could just run a fullback dive every play, and I'd expect you to do better than that.
You could do the tush push all game long. You could just snap one to your final snap. You could tush push it all the way.
Let's have the NFL do this. Let's have the Eagles play the Cardinals with Clayton Tune, a quarterback, and say, okay, the Eagles can only run the tush push, and the Cardinals can run anything in their playbook, and let's see who has more yards. I would bet on the Eagles.
You know how they do anytime there's any NFL game in prime time, they're like, well, you know what? This was a bad game, but look at the ratings. It's more than every MLB game that's ever been played. It's more than an NBA playoff game. Whatever. Look at that. You think that game would beat the ratings for every other sport, like all these insiders always talk about?
It would, because of fantasy and because of gambling. Anyway, I wish I could say something nice.
We need help as a society. We need a
lot of help as a society. I'm not sure I'm coming up with a lot of solutions. I can question a lot of things. So Deshaun Watson, hey, a couple of touchdowns, 7.83 yards per attempt. But look at the cosmos, right? Last week, the Browns lose their game in part because they throw an ill-fated late pass. It hits the helmet. It's picked off by the Seahawks. Well, the football gods are fair, guys. They say, okay, let's have the Browns throw another ridiculous helmet pass. Let's have it bounce 10 or 12 yards downfield. into the hands of Amari Cooper for a touchdown. We take one away, we give you one back. Of course, Browns fans will say we didn't need it. I mean, the Cardinals were never going to score in this game, and I get it. But so that cosmetically makes Cooper's game better than it was. Look, it's all the teams that gave up on Joshua Dobbs, right? I mean, this whole season, I've thought to myself,
both of these teams,
right, exactly. This whole season, I thought, well, I don't want Deshaun Watson. I don't like watching Deshaun Watson. I have trouble rooting for Deshaun Watson. He's not playing well. I wish they still had Brissett. You know what? I wish they still had Joshua Dobbs. I could root for that guy. I don't still trust Watson. And look, Cooper gets a big game. One of it was a fluke touchdown, but whatever. He had a couple of legitimate plays in structure, so you feel good about that. But Elijah Moore was quiet, and Njoku got the touchdown deodorant. None of the running backs acquitted themselves well. They all averaged 3.0 yards a carry or fewer. I feel like the Browns just won this game on defense, and it feels artificial that they scored 27 points because I never felt that good about their offense. When the weather gets colder, the Browns are going to be playing that Steelers football game. Like, how can we win this game 13-10? I don't like their offense with Watson at all, and how can you really like it with PJ Walker?
No, still a lot of prove it left to be proven with the Cleveland Browns. And on the Arizona side, I am interested to see what this team looks like with Kyler Murray down the stretch. But Scott, after we end this podcast, I'm going to forget that this game ever happened. I mean, this is a forget it ever happened type
I
of
gave
NFL
some
game.
people some desperate people, some Keontae Ingram advice. Now, granted, they were probably him or Roshan Johnson. Those are the types of things they were asking me, right? I mean, it wasn't like him or Ezekiel Elliott. You know, I wasn't sitting him for anybody who had any real juice, but 9 carries for 8 yards. Do you have any kind of expectations on Kyler Murray?
It's hard to know, right? Because he's coming off a major injury, and athleticism is a big part of his game. I do think, again, it's just throw this in the trash can because this isn't serious. There were times where this offense looked perfectly competent, right? Like, you know, they're going to get James Conner back at some point. Like, James Conner's an NFL back. Keontae Ingram is not an NFL back. Marquise Brown's a pretty good receiver. They didn't even have rookie Michael Wilson. You know, they don't even have they didn't even have Amari DiMercato. Like this, they're really banged up in this game on top of starting Clayton Tune. Like, it's a pretty brutal situation. So I do think Murray's a little bit set up to succeed here because Marquise Brown's a good player. I think Michael Wilson has legit shown flashes this year. I think Trey McBride has legit shown flashes this year. And when they have real NFL running backs, which they did not today, nobody can be mad at you if you told them to start Keontae Ingram and they got banged. Because you know what? If you were thinking like, should I start Keontae Ingram? Your team is screwed anyways. Congratulations. Once they have some real NFL players here, I think Kyler Murray's like kind of set up to succeed. And I think that will put them, you know, in a pretty interesting discussion with what do we do with Murray if we have like the first overall pick in the draft.
Well said.
All right. I think that's going to do it. Scott, what a fun week in the NFL, right? Where there were some big games and then there were some
quasi-fun. Really, it was a quasi-fun week. We had full, and we'll see. There's still some stuff to come. This was the slate where it was all top heavy, right? We had 4 games that looked really, really good. And then a bunch of games that look kind of sketchy. And, you know, some of the sketchy games were good. And some of the games that look great were kind of sketchy.
Yep. That is pretty much how you sum it up. That's going to do it for us today. Be sure to tune in on Tuesday where Andy and I are going to go through the post week 9 panic meter. Send in your responses to fantasymailbag@yahoosports.com. Baby, come on. I know you're panicked about stuff out there, even though it's week 9. I'm still letting you panic. It's fine. Plenty of stuff. I mean, my God, you're going to be panicked over a lot of these receivers who are paired up with some really goofy quarterbacks at this point. So stuff the panic meter mailbag. Get into it. We'll get into it then. Until then, we're out.